Welcome to Embracing Diversity and English Language Development in Your Program, a course for directors and administrators. This is a Building Programs, Building Brains course developed by BostNet in partnership with UMass Boston, with support from the Department of Early Education and Care here in Massachusetts, and brain building is in progress. Please feel free to hover over any of the logos on this slide to learn more. This is assessment and goal setting. As you attempt to identify where you want your program to go next, a great place to start is to look at some of the standards and best practices themselves and decide how you would like to assess the quality of your program and identify gaps or areas that need work. Taking a look at formal assessments like the SACRS and the APT, which are both required by QRIS, that's a great idea. That's a great strategy, and looking at the data that you get from doing those assessments can help you hone in on what you want to work on in your program. Another really helpful perspective is to look at the teacher observations. The teacher observation that is required by QRIS is either the RNet caregiver or the class. And so by looking at the educational environment, the classrooms themselves, and the interactions between the kids and the staff, you can get some ideas about how the concepts that you're trying to infuse are actually being implemented in the program on a day-to-day basis. It's also very valuable to look at your policies and your expectations and your ways of communicating about documenting and tracking what pieces of these best practices you're expecting the staff to implement. You can also take a look at the space itself, the way that the space is set up or designed, the materials that the staff have available to them. And you can review the written lesson plans, the activity plans, and the schedule for the day, for each day with the kids, as well as the more informal activities that staff do during transition times or during bus rides. And in all of these, you want to be looking for opportunities to infuse those best practices, to infuse those concepts and those standards that you've identified as priorities for yourself and for your program. When you're assessing your program, whether you're using a formal assessment or an informal assessment, there are a number of different steps that can be helpful in making sure that you get the most useful information possible from the assessment process. The first step is to observe. And again, whether you're using a tool or not, you really want to start with a very objective observation. So see your program as somebody who had never been there would see it. Try to erase your mind clean and forget everything that you know about your staff and kids and the space and the activities and the materials and supplies, and just imagine that you are a visitor coming there for the very first time. Next, you want to assess. So ask yourself more formally questions about alignments. I strongly encourage you to choose one framework at a time. Look at the SACRS or look at the APT. Or look at the standards that are in the QRIS. Or look at the curriculum frameworks, the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks. Or look at Universal Design for Learning, or look at thematic curriculum and project-based learning. Ideally, you eventually want to be aligning to all of these things, but trying to do that all at once is going to be overwhelming and stressful for everyone. So choose one to look at first, and then after you've done that initial observation, take a look at the requirements around that particular type of alignment more specifically and see how you're doing. Be as specific as possible, be as quantitative as possible. So that means try to really be measurable and numbers focused in how you're looking at what is and isn't happening. So instead of just saying it seems like the staff really are not using the themes in very many of their activities, observe throughout the day and say only in 2 of 5 activities was the theme evident. So it's more specific and it's more numbers based or quantitative. The third step is to engage. Ask the staff what they think. Ask the families, ask the children. Give staff time to float around and look at the program from a broader perspective while you watch their class for them for 10 minutes. Have a poster out in the entryway where parents come to pick up their kids with a survey question on it and stickers, so the parents can choose the answer that they think is correct or true for them and put the sticker next to it. And it takes 2 seconds. You ask a different question every week, and in a few weeks you have a nice little data set. Use your first star charts where the kids have a list of all the activities and they get to put stickers or stars next to their favorite ones so that you're getting feedback from them. Ask the staff to anonymously fill out evaluations of you or other supervisors in the program so that you can get their perspective on what's going well and what's going poorly, or their perspective on other elements of the program. Implement a kudos program. A kudos program is where you give the staff little stickers or kudos bars or some kind of little prize, and they're assigned sometime during the week to find something that one of their colleagues is doing well and give them that specific praise along with the little prize, and then let you know what the praise was that they gave along with the prize to give yourself a broader perspective on what is going on. And then once you've really engaged everyone and broadened your view, the last step is deciding. So you've got all this information from your observation and from your more formal quantitative assessment, and you've also got the broader perspectives of other stakeholders, the staff and the families and the children. Now you need to pick what to work on. So that means choosing a specific outcome that you want to accomplish, something specific and concrete that you want to have start happening in your program. Deciding what you don't like does not count as deciding. You need to decide what you want, what positive, proactive thing you want to see happening in your program. And hopefully by the end of this course, you'll feel really empowered to make that happen. Once you've decided on your positive outcome, it's time to set a concrete goal. And the goal is really important. It's way, way more important than people give it credit for, because the goal is going to drive your plan and your implementation and eventually your outcomes. So when you are setting your goal, it needs to have certain characteristics. The first is that it needs to be time limited. It needs to have a start date and an end date and a clear time frame for when it's taking place. The second is that it needs to be exciting. You and your team need to feel the value of what you're doing and be able to get enthusiastic about doing the work that will have to be done in order to make it happen. The third is that it needs to be achievable. It needs to be realistic within the framework of your existing program, so that you don't set a goal that everyone is excited about and then you fail to reach it, and then that totals your morale. It's really bad for morale when that happens. And the fourth is that it needs to be measurable and concrete. So some of that quantitative, specific information that we were talking about before is really important so that you know when you've reached your goal. So we're going to look at each of these four characteristics a little more closely. So time limited. There are two really essential pieces of information that you absolutely need as a part of your goal in order to make sure that your goal is time limited. When are you going to start and when are you going to end? So the start date and the end date are essential. There are some other pieces of information that it's helpful to gather, or other questions that you can kind of reflect on. How much time overall do you think that it's going to take you and other members of your staff to accomplish this goal? Making sure that you're aware of the overall time investment will help you when you get to the achievable piece. But it will also help you to determine an appropriate start date and end date. Are you going to be able to give the staff extra time to work on the goal? Does that affect how you plan the start date and end date? And do the time frame and the deadline make sense when you think about the current structure of your existing program? So the start date and the end date are the focus of this element, the time-limited element. The second element is exciting. So the essential pieces of information for exciting. Firstly, what will be different in the program? And why does that matter? Who cares? I mean, that sounds kind of harsh, but that's the way that staff are going to feel about it when they realize that extra work is involved. So it needs to be a question you ask yourself first and you have a good, solid answer to that can help staff feel excited and inspired. And secondly, what is in it for the staff? What is in it for the children? What is in it for the families? It doesn't have to mean that they get stuff, but what about their world or their lives are going to get better? What kinds of outcomes can they anticipate? And how will that make things better? How will it make a difference? Some other considerations around making sure that your goal is exciting. Asking yourself to what extent the goal is naturally exciting to staff, and to what extent they're going to need support to stay motivated, to stay excited. That is not a question that should determine whether or not you go forward with a goal, but it is a question that it's important to think about. So if you know that you're choosing a goal that it's going to be hard to get people excited about, being consciously aware of that early on will help you to design a plan that provides additional support to staff to keep them excited and motivated. Then, is it obvious? why this goal is valuable, or are there ways that you can make it clearer? Can you do like a progress chart or some kind of like outcome measures that you share as things start progressing and results start to arise out of the work that goes into accomplishing your goal? And then lastly, what can you do to keep energy high with staff? Because typically, even with a really exciting goal, people start out really excited and really motivated to work on it. And then that motivation kind of tapers off and it fades into the background because, a parent comes in angry and screaming, or there's an outbreak of strep throat, or there are lice in your pillows. And the sort of day-to-day pieces of keeping a program going get in the way. And the motivation to work on the goal fades into the background and gets lost. So what can you do to kind of reignite that enthusiasm, spark it? But for the exciting item, the two essential elements are that first element, what will be different and why is that important? And the second element, what's in it for staff, children, and families. So make sure you have answers to those questions. Achievable is our third element of a solidly written goal. And the essential information for achievable that you need to get, that you need to ask yourself and have an answer to, is firstly, how will the effort that this goal represents fit into your current workload of your team and your current schedule of your program? How are you going to make those two things work together? And secondly, what allowances are you making for the day-to-day unexpected issues, those yelling parents and strep throat outbreaks and lice in the pillows and all the kinds of issues that arise on a day-to-day basis that take that time away from working on ongoing program quality goals? Some other elements to consider. Firstly, are there some smaller steps that you could break your goal down into? If it's a goal that feels a little difficult, like if it's not quite as achievable as you might want it to be, can you break it into benchmarks and make one of those, that first benchmark, be your first goal instead? And then secondly, do you feel that you have at least an 80% likelihood that you and your team are going to be able to reach this goal? You want to set people up for success when you're setting goals, because people are motivated by the feeling of success and it makes them more interested in working on something like program quality again in the future. So you always want to try to set goals where you feel like there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be able to succeed at that goal, but enough of a challenge to make people feel like they've really accomplished something. And feeling as though you have about an 80% chance is a really good threshold for that. And thirdly, what are you going to do if you start to fall behind? You want to think about that before you begin, because you don't want to panic or come down really hard on the staff or give up, and you don't want them to panic or come down really hard on themselves or give up. So have already in your mind an idea of what you're going to do if you start to feel like you're falling behind. So again, for achievable, the two core pieces of information are: how is the effort associated with this goal going to fit into your current workload and your current schedule? And what allowances are you making for the unexpected day-to-day issues that arise? The fourth characteristic of your goal is that it be measurable. And if one of the four characteristics is the most important one, measurable is the one. That's the one that's going to really have a huge impact on whether or not you achieve something meaningful, and also whether or not you can show and prove and talk about what you've achieved and what it looks like and what kind of a difference you've made in your program. So, two pieces of essential information for measurable goals. First, what is the metric? What thing are you going to measure? This could be an outcome with the kids. It could have to do with academic success, like for instance, improvement on a literacy score on the DIBELS, showing that language skills have improved. It could be something to do with families, like families reporting that they feel that their culture is better represented within the program. It could be something with staff, like staff reporting increased skills or comfort in embracing diversity or a variety of cultures in their classroom. So it can be a lot of different types of things, but choose the way that you're going to measure success first. And then the second thing that you need to do is figure out how you're going to measure success. What specific percentage or score or outcome equals success? So for instance, do you want at least 80% of the kids in your program to score better on their DIBELS tests? Do you want at least 90% of parents to indicate that they feel that their culture is respected and represented within the program's curriculum and activities? Do you want 100% of staff to say that they feel comfortable including a variety of different types of cultural activities in their everyday lesson planning and activity? So you need to think about exactly what type of thing you're going to measure, and then exactly what score or percentage or number within that type of thing equals success. Some other things to think about in terms of the measurable criterion on your goals. First of all, are you setting it up so that everyone on the team is going to agree as to whether or not you've succeeded in meeting the goal? This is really important because let's say that you set a measurable outcome that says 80% of staff will improve in lesson planning. And then you ask the staff whether they think they improved in lesson planning, and they say, yeah, we totally met the goal. Let's have our pizza party. And you say, well, actually, I haven't seen any change at all. So that's terrible for morale. So you really want to make sure that before you start, you figure out how you're going to measure that improvement so that everyone will agree on it. And then the second thing that it's important to do is make sure that what you're measuring is actually linked back at all to what you're trying to accomplish. For instance, if what you're trying to accomplish in your goal is to support children's language development skills, you don't want to be measuring how much the staff like the books that they're reading, because that's not going to have any connection back to the goal that you're trying to measure. So in summary, for your measurable characteristic of your goals, you want to make sure that you first choose what type of thing you are going to measure. And once you've chosen that, how you are going to decide what counts as success, what specific goal within that metric or that type of thing equals success. True or false? It is extremely important to have a clear and concrete way of measuring whether you have reached your goal or not.